Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into a history that completely transforms how we understand the modern Costa Rican state. You know, we often get handed these simplified, kind of sanitized versions of national history, right? Well, today, we're flipping that script. We're going to look closely at the Afro-Costa Rican experience, tracing their incredible journey and their literal nation-building impact on the country's infrastructure, culture, and very identity. It's a story of grit, of resilience, and ultimate recognition. And it's absolutely crucial if you want to understand modern Central America. Let's get into it. So here's a question for you. Did you know that today's Costa Rica was actually defined in a huge way thanks to the Caribbean effort of the 19th century? It completely challenges the traditional narrative. We aren't just talking about some minor historical footnote here. We are talking about a foundational, massive effort that physically and economically shaped the nation we know today. So keep this idea in the back of your mind as we move through the timeline. Okay, part 1, Roots and Arrival in the Caribbean. To really grasp this whole picture, we actually have to start outside of Costa Rica. The true catalyst? The abolition of slavery in Jamaica back in 1833. This was a monumental milestone, and it created this massive wave of change across the Caribbean. Suddenly, you had thousands of newly emancipated individuals who were finally free, but now they were facing this pressing need to find new labor opportunities and build lives for their families. And it was this search for economic viability that really pushed many of them to look toward the Central American Isthmus. And that brings us to a very specific and honestly very important number, 123. On December 20th, 1872, a steamship named the Lizzie arrived in Puerto Limón. And aboard that ship were exactly 123 brave Jamaican workers. Not a faceless crowd, not some rough estimate. Exactly 123 individuals who stepped off a boat and right into a dense, incredibly challenging tropical environment. They were contracted laborers brought in for a totally titanic task, and their arrival marks the definitive start of the Afro-Descendant community in Costa Rica. Moving on to part 2, the Railway and United Fruit Company. So these workers, and the thousands who eventually followed them, were brought in for a massive infrastructure project. We're talking about the construction of the Atlantic Railway. Now, this was not your standard construction job. Pushing a railway through the dense Central American tropical jungle, that required an admirable level of courage, physical endurance, and just sheer resistance. The climate was extreme, diseases were rampant, and the labor was backbreaking. But you know what? The contribution of these workers went way, way beyond just the physical muscle needed to lay down those tracks. Right, so beyond their sheer physical strength, these Jamaican workers brought this absolute wealth of intangible assets that fundamentally transformed the Limón province forever. For starters, they maintained their ties with the Anglophone Caribbean by bringing the English language. Plus, they brought specialized technical knowledge that was absolutely essential for getting the railway operational. And perhaps most importantly, they brought a rich, vibrant Caribbean culture. They didn't just build a railway, guys, they built an entire society. They set up their own community networks, they built their own schools, and founded their own churches. They laid the tracks, sure, but they literally laid the entire cultural foundation of the region too. Now, all of this incredibly hard work and community building set the stage for a massive economic boom. Fast forward to 1899, and the United Fruit Company, or UFCO, is founded. With that railway now fully in place, banana production just absolutely exploded. It turned into the central economic axis of the entire province. The region was completely transformed into a global agro-export hub. And who was the actual engine of this economic powerhouse? It was the labor, the specialized skills, and those deeply rooted community structures of the Afro-descendant population. They were the undeniable lifeblood of this booming economy, no question about it. Which brings us to part 3, legal segregation of 1934. And here's where the narrative takes a really dark and sobering turn. Because despite their incalculable contribution to the development and the immense wealth of the country, this community did not get to enjoy the fruits of their labor equally. Instead of reward and recognition, the Black population suddenly found themselves facing severe legal barriers and institutional persecution. It's a stark, heartbreaking contrast between the incredible value they provided to the state and how the state treated them in return. This is a critical chapter we absolutely have to understand. So let's look at this harsh reality. In 1934, Costa Rica enacted Law Number 31. This was a law that expressly, legally prohibited the hiring of Black workers outside of the Atlantic zone. Practically speaking, this completely prevented them from migrating toward the Central Valley of the country. I want you to really absorb what this means for a second. It was territorial and labor discrimination directly codified into law. It legally restricted their geographical mobility and actively stunted their economic progress and integration for literally decades. They were confined legally to the very area they had built. Unbelievable, right? All right, part 4, citizenship and recognition. Because fortunately, history doesn't stop in 1934. After decades of marginalization, we transition into a really hard-fought period of citizenship and recognition. The definitive inflection point for the Afro-Costa Rican community actually occurred in the mid-20th century. Following the Costa Rican Revolution of 1948, a brand new political landscape emerged, bringing with it a new foundational constitution. And this era marks the triumphant, though definitely long overdue, resolution to their fight for basic civil rights. Looking at this timeline brilliantly illustrates the long arc of this history. We start back in 1872 with their arrival as foreign labor, and then we move through that really dark period in 1934 with the legal segregation of mobility. But then comes the massive breakthrough. The political constitution of 1949 finally granted full Costa Rican nationality and the right to vote to the Afro-descendant population, tearing open the doors to political and institutional integration. Then, fast forward to 1998, we see the establishment of the Day of the Black Person and Afroculture to honor this heritage. And most recently, the totally pivotal 2015 constitutional reform, which officially declared Costa Rica a multi-ethnic and pluricultural state. Which brings us to part 5, legacy and national identity. Today, we have to look closely at this incredible legacy and what it actually means for national identity. A rigorous historical valuation requires us to just completely discard that old, outdated narrative of the Afro-Caribbean population as merely temporary workers. That's just not true. We have to recognize them for what they truly are, permanent builders of the Costa Rican state. Educating ourselves on this history, it isn't just about memorizing dates for a test. It's about respecting the deep, permanent integration of this community into the very heart of the nation. This journey perfectly encapsulates everything we've covered in this explainer, from the roots of Caribbean emancipation and migration, all the way through the grueling but totally transformative infrastructure of the railway and banana plantations, right up to a fully integrated cultural legacy today. And preserving this heritage means fostering respect for unique cultural markers, things like Mecatuyu, the local English-based Creole, as well as the rich Limonense literature and traditional gastronomy. From the 1949 Constitution all the way up to that 2015 amendment, Afro-descendant culture has been recognized as being right at the very heart of the homeland. So that leaves us with one final thought to ponder. How does recognizing this permanent historical contribution change your understanding of Costa Rican identity today? When you realize that the modern state was quite literally built, shaped, and culturally enriched by the Afro-descendant community, you really can no longer view the country through a single narrow lens. It is a vibrant, multi-ethnic reality. I really hope this explainer has sparked your curiosity to learn even more about this incredible history. Thanks so much for joining me today, and keep exploring.